PSSR on the PS5 Pro has had a tumultuous launch window, and believe it or not, we're only into our second month of its presence in the market, and we have seen some odd decisions and updates made to games and even back and forth. Now, PSSR has not been, as I always said across all my work, a silver bullet that people expected. And generally, people who don't work in the industry or understand how technology works, it just doesn't work like that. There's no such thing. It never will be. But the results and choices made have been perplexing at times. Certainly to me, anyway. As I've been away for much of November and early December due to a huge deployment phase in my real job, I've not been able to cover this sub-game or any technology in retro landscape as much as I planned. That can change now as the workload, for me at least, starts to dissipate, and as such I thought a good place to start is with a team that were also put under the cosh in striking distance and the 6-month or so shorter development cycle they had for launching this game. The engine and tech team, led by Jorge Jimenez, jumped in to make some fast and great use of the Pro hardware, but I think without PSSR. But it also gives an example to highlight what I think may be going on and what could be an area for improvement for that solution. Now, this is a new style of video I'm trying. It's not scripted. It's mostly prompted with a soft focus on main data points and examples. Hence, I call it random access. So if you like this or anything else I've done or will do, then like, subscribe, share, and comment down below. Now, this game is a great technical achievement in terms of character rendering, lighting quality, image quality, and how close it comes to matching huge teams' quality in their first attempt. But the challenges of doing this within 3 years and across 2 generations of consoles and PC is also worthy of high praise. Clearly, though, it was a game, still is, with bugs, issues, and corners cut due to those constraints, but one that certainly had the merit to go on to better things. The Pro patch, though, tries to target a few key areas of the game itself and what the console itself aims to offer, namely higher fidelity rendering, improved ray tracing at 60 FPS, and they look to remain with their own TAA solution on the PS5 here. The previous 2 modes the PS5 had have been replaced with 3 modes now, which is one of the things that the PS5 Pro was meant to stop. We're now seeing more and more options in the menu, which is not a terrible thing by and large, but for consoles, can get a little bit confusing. What we now have is Performance 4K 60, which is basically a mix between the old quality mode and the old performance mode, which had no ray tracing previously on the PS5. And then we have the balanced quality 4K 40 mode, which is basically the balance mode between the old quality mode and somewhere in between, using a 120Hz screen. You don't need VRR. And then finally an 8K mode at 30 FPS, which is basically the bumped up version of the old quality mode, but now it improves everything across the board, specifically just by resolution. Now, what this means is we don't have an actual 8K resolution. It will work on a 4K screen and downsample, but effectively in the menu they say 6K, and that is what I get on some counts by basically forcing an 8K output and then doing a pixel count from within the internal capture of PS5. I can get high points staring at this mirror here, which is around 6K. But generally it tends to be at or above 4K all the time, and that is obvious in the comparisons, specifically the ray trace reflections or anything that uses dithered sparse shading, where you can see obvious issues there where they're using this sparse shading technique such as hair, shadows, ray trace shadows specifically, and reflections. Now, I believe it's not using PSSR because the image quality is very similar to the PS5 version, which isn't the same as the PC running both quality FSR2 and even TAA at 90%, which is close to what we're seeing around that 4K 40 FPS mode. Now, this is systemic with what we've seen so far on PSSR titles across many games. Fundamentally, PSSR is a machine learning language model. So basically large models, small models, whatever you want to pass it off as. This is all based on looking at thousands of resolutions, thousands of games, thousands of frames, how everything works, and it creates a dynamic library. So it creates a model, as they call it, but effectively it's data points. And it then assumes or infers what that data should look like when it's missing. So if you use sparse rendering, i.e. you use half or a quarter resolution of the actual frame itself, it fills in the blanks. Now the problem with that is movement of pixels, pixels that are occluded, pixels that appear and disappear, and send specifically in games like this or modern titles, alpha, transparencies, ray tracing, which is very, very demanding when it comes to things like this, because you have to think about things like depth, color, movement, and the input is as important to these things as anything else. So most games, as I mentioned on my previous videos, I'll put a link down below, one where I discussed this in depth quite a few years ago, TAA kind of relies on specific functions. And the same as DLSS, FSR, XESS, they all rely on the same thing, which is fundamentally color buffers, depth buffers, motion vectors, and then a stochastic sample and clamping. So like a jittering method within the matrix to try and work out. Jittering is basically moving the camera around fast, not physically, but within the actual engine. So it kind of samples more parts of the pixel, and then over time, it actually converges to more data. And then clamping. Now, clamping is important because you have to have a level where you don't want to go beyond. Otherwise, if you have a high contrast, like a black and a white, and you can see it here actually, it starts to blend into each other and jiggle, it wobbles, it moves, and it's never stable. And that's one of the main problems with TAA generally. It's softer and it's not very stable when things are not quite precise. The subpixel details, I always call it the subpixel jitter. And then you see it again in any reconstruction method. There's certain things that just break down by very nature of that. Depth is a big problem. Depth is a huge problem in a lot of these games. Ray trace reflections of it. You can see it here on the PS5 Pro, even in the 8K mode. It's more dithered or stochastic, so noisy, than it is on the 4K TAAU mode on the left-hand side, or TAU. There's no U here, it's 4K native. But what you can see is it's clearly softer in terms of smudging, but it's less noisy. And this is over the PS5 and the PS5 Pro. And comparing the PS5 ray trace mode versus PS5 Pro 8K mode, we can see almost identical rays per pixel counts, giving us a sharper image in the reflection than even that 4K TAA PC mode. And this is likely that the PS5 SDK uses less rays per pixel than DSXR requires on PC. And the TAU pass on PS5 is also tailored to be less aggressive on its blended pixels, which leaves a sharper but more noisy or stochastic image on PS5 and Pro than PC. You can also see the image quality, stability, and resolve are practically identical here on base PS5 to the PS5 Pro, demonstrating why I believe the team have just used pure GPU grunt to boost effects and resolution here, rather than delve deeper into the binary of the game code to leverage the RT benefits such as BVH or improved triangle intersection or other benefits that it offers such as PSSR, which would require far more work, see time and cost, than just improving the base engine settings to better use the GPU and bandwidth grunt. Now the Performance 4K 60 mode highlights this, as it runs both the game itself and the RT reflections at a lower resolution on average than the base PS5's RT mode. Changing the PC to medium RT reflections seems to only reduce the surfaces that are reflective, or the cutoff the actual resolution quality is at, which is impacted most by resolution. Now this still delivers the target of 60 FPS with ray tracing in play that they look close enough to in play, but zoomed in and comparing them or staring at them side by side as you see here, then that order of RT quality and overall resolution is pretty clear. It's PS5 Pro Performance 60 RT at the bottom, then PS5 itself base Ray Trace 30 mode, then that PS5 Pro Balance 40 mode, and finally the 8K 30 ray tracing mode is best. But beyond the 4K mode, we're well within diminishing returns here. The convergence and clamping, or better, weighting that I keep talking about, of the image itself within that TAAU and the ray tracing pass cause these blobby reflections that morph or shape shift, almost like the thing itself, on both PS5 and PS5 Pro. And this is due to the lower resolution and raised cast, and I keep saying this, I've said it for years, the base resolution input is important, specifically when it comes to ray tracing and certainly when you're reprojecting or reconstructing that image back to a higher resolution. And that ever-changing DRS range, which PC does not have, causes the data here to shift on PS5 and PS5 Pro over multiple frames, which is identical on both. And even that 8K mode, this still happens, as the underlying ray tracing pass has not been updated to better use the custom RDNA 2/4 hardware within. But it's clearly a boost to the game's quality and offers that rare ray trace reflections in shadows at 60 FPS on console, which is the job well done. And even an 8K mode, which is almost a unicorn on console and PC. Now shush at the back. I know you're going to moan at me now in the comments about it's not full native 8K. I know it's not, so please don't hammer the comments. But fundamentally, it's still a nice boost to the PS5 Pro. And it's been done by a team that really doesn't have the time and budget and effort to do it. And they've probably done this, like I say, without leaning heavily into the core underlying SDK updates and operating system choices that the PS5 Pro offers. This has been a very quick update, but it's a great result nonetheless.
I found one of those gloves that Captain Ferris had. Yeah, I remember.
Now, even around launch, the game ran well on the PS5 anyway at 30 FPS. It had a few dropped frames here and there, and this is version 1.02, and it's only improved since then, both in performance and visual quality. So this patch doesn't really look to fix any serious performance issues. Now, the 60 FPS mode could have a couple of dips in certain heavy sections, but because of the great dynamic scaling in the game, the DRS works exceptionally well, and therefore the image quality and performance is kind of kept in that perfect equilibrium, or what consoles tend to do. So it runs a pretty much a lock 60 FPS and a lock 30 FPS. And because these new modes that have been added to the game don't actually go above that, other than the 40 FPS balance mode, there's not a lot here to discuss. It does run slightly better than some of the sections I could find on the PS5 Pro in the 60 FPS mode that dip. And therefore, it's doing that at slightly lower resolutions, but with ray tracing. So it is doing a lot more for the same performance target of 16 milliseconds. So that's already quite impressive. And the 40 FPS mode, for me, is the best way to play the game now, because it's pretty smooth on a 120Hz screen. It feels perfect. It's, again, a lovely, smooth 40 FPS. There's no real shift in that performance target. And it actually runs better than it does on PC. Again, I said this right at the start. The PC version isn't exactly an example of how to get a top-of-the-range PC version out. But again, a lot of this wasn't down to the team directly themselves. It still doesn't run perfect on PC. It can have stutters, have jitters. But generally, it still performs well in terms of utilizing the GPU. And an RX 6800 doesn't perform the same level as what we're seeing here on the PS5 Pro. And this isn't maximizing the PS5 Pro, as we just said. So overall, none of these improvements in image quality and resolution and ray tracing come at the cost of performance. But there's not really a lot here to discuss. It ran well before. It still runs well now in all three modes. So, the comparison here to PC, the first question people may ask me is why 85% 4K TAA? And that's because the 40 FPS mode seems to hover somewhere between 1800p and 4K using TAA. So I've gone somewhere in the middle, and therefore you're getting the closest match to that on PC. And this is why you're seeing such a delta between that and the RX 6800. So fundamentally, it still runs well on the PS5 Pro, over and above what you'd expect of the base hardware compared to PC. That said, I still think a lot more could become, but the impressive results are impressive nonetheless. At the end of the day, the team have done this very quickly, very easily on the back of their other game, Redacted, to try and get updates out to the PS5 Pro. Both games are updated. Redacted actually, obviously, is a far simpler game, but that can run 8K 60 FPS. So here, they really have utilized the GPU very well, considering the time and constraints they've had on that. I could be proven wrong by the team, but it doesn't look like it's using PSSR, and if it does, it hasn't made much of a difference to the image quality, and actually lowers the image quality in that performance mode, albeit with ray tracing now enabled. So therefore, I am inclined to believe that from all my tests, this is just using the same base GPU bump to improve the quality of the game. And that's good. You don't have to use PSSR, and there are some other games I'll be getting to later that is a mixed blessing in terms of what it can and can't do. But ray tracing is a nice addition. And again, one of the fundamentals of this was to deliver 60 FPS with ray tracing. And again, that achieves it here. We've seen other titles that do it, such as Hogwarts, which really pushes hard on the ray tracing aspect in terms of PS5 Pro. It pushes much, much better and more divergent ray tracing calculations on reflections, and also adds in ray traced shadows as well. So overall, there is a lot more here to come, just as I said in my PS5 Pro review. And now that I've got time, expect a big swathe of titles that I'm going to dig into in more detail, and hopefully this kind of fast look at titles makes it easier for me to get stuff out, because I can compile the data, and then I just talk over it in the best edited fashion as possible without compiling a whole script to make it more confined. Anyway, give your thoughts and feedback down below. I'm out. Remember, I am self-funded and independent. If you can help, chip down below. And remember, I'll be back very soon with more Christmas and retro content. I'll catch you on the next one.